4 years during the Great War. The early war Russian fighters were already obsolete. Aircraft such as the Polikarpov I-153, a lumbering biplane, and the Polikarpov I-16, known as the Ratter, were easily outclassed by the new generation of German fighters. These included the German Messerschmitt 109 fighters, which were faster and more maneuverable than anything the Russians could throw against them. At last, at 0400 on the 22nd of June 1941, the code word Dortmund crackled down the wires, and the full force of Operation Barbarossa, Germany's invasion of Soviet Russia, was unleashed. As they had come to expect, the German armies sliced through the opposition on the way to Leningrad. Faced by the results of his own failures in military matters, Stalin panicked. While his army headquarters desperately tried to piece together the most rudimentary picture of what was happening, he ordered an immediate counter-offensive on all fronts. As the first reports of the devastation he had helped to create filtered through, he was close to breaking point. All that Lenin created, we have lost forever, he declared, before retreating to his dacha, not to emerge until the 3rd of July. What really stunned the Red Army commanders was that this massive German assault had proceeded long after it had left its artillery support behind. The Red Army Command had planned for conventional meeting engagements and frontline battles. The perceived wisdom was that these would develop over days or even weeks. Next would come a large series of complex engagements, and then the real war would begin. In reality, using the new blitzkrieg tactics, the German advance was so swift that within hours of the launch of Barbarossa, tank columns from Panzer Group 4 were approaching Riga, some 50 miles behind the front. This extended blitzkrieg technique, especially the bold use of armour, came as an extraordinary and disorientating surprise to the Russians, even to the senior Soviet commanders. Within 48 hours, General Staff reports made it perfectly plain that they had lost control of the situation. They were in complete chaos, and many did not know where their troops were or what was happening. They certainly did not have accurate reports of German movements, and there was no real intelligence, so they were not even sure where the German thrusts were aimed. All that they did know was that in the northwest there was total collapse. In consequence, Stalin operated his usual practice. He had most of the front commanders arrested and then shot. As a consequence of the confusion which raged throughout the army, many of the Red Army divisions simply broke up and formed very large pockets of leaderless troops. Passing these groups of disorientated men, von Leeb's Army Group North scythed into the Baltic states, capturing Riga, the Latvian capital. The number of prisoners taken and the war material captured or destroyed in Operation Barbarossa was assuming astronomical proportions. It is hardly surprising that Hitler, his commanders and the troops themselves now believed that the Red Army must be nearing the end of its resources, both in manpower and in weapons. Prisoners confessed that the German attack had been completely unexpected. Moscow, it seemed, was certain to fall into German hands. Great optimism prevailed in Army Group Centre. Hitler had already set up a special engineer command, whose task was to be the demolition of the Kremlin. The propaganda ministry saw fit to make a bombastic statement, announcing that the war in the East was won, and the Red Army practically annihilated. During the early stages of the campaign, the Stuka dive bombers of Luftflotte 1 played their familiar role as the German storm broke against Russia. The initial moves followed the classic blitzkrieg pattern: no declaration of war and a fast-moving assault designed to disorientate and confuse the Russian army. As the forces of Army Group North drove further into the Baltic states, Latvia and Estonia were quickly captured. These lightning advances were greeted with joy by the citizens of cities like Riga, where the population viewed the German armies as liberators. A great deal of the naval effort throughout the campaign lay in suppressing Soviet naval activity by laying thousands of mines, a task which continued even in the face of fierce air resistance. These ships of Karl's battle group continued with the task of mine-laying despite the attentions of the Red Air Force. On land, the presence of a strong armoured force in the form of Panzer Group 4 gave Army Group North some much-needed tank support during the headlong advance into Russia. Nevertheless, the rudimentary road system of the Baltic states and northern Russia played havoc with the tanks. Right at the beginning of the Russian campaign, the Germans experienced the problems which dust can cause in motor vehicles. Tanks sustained severe damage from the dust they stirred up while crossing vast sandy regions. Many tanks had no dust filters, and on those which were equipped, the filters soon became thoroughly clogged. Quartz dust was sucked into engines, which became so ground out that many tanks were rendered unserviceable. In other tanks, the abrasive action of dust reduced engine efficiency and massively increased fuel consumption. The sand roads undoubtedly caused problems. They greatly slowed tanks or trucks. They also caused huge dust clouds which were raised by convoys. These dust clouds frequently provoked air attacks by the surviving aircraft of the Red Air Force. As the Red Air Force regathered its strength, these attacks resulted in serious losses of men, vehicles and horses. For as long as they were in support of Army Group North, the tanks of Panzer Group 4 played an invaluable role. But even with the panzers, the swift advances of June and July ground to a halt against the tough defences of the Stalin Line, which were encountered in August and early September. While the fortifications of the frontier districts left much to be desired, there were still extensive fortifications to be overcome deep within Mother Russia. Although they did not form a solid, unbroken line of fortifications like the French Maginot Line, the heavily defended Stalin Line, or the Leningrad Line as the German forces in the north knew it, was a formidable series of prepared defences. Areas of great importance were surrounded with heavy fortifications, and the German armoured units driving for Leningrad encountered fortification systems up to 6 miles in depth, including well-positioned earth and concrete bunkers with built-in guns and other heavy weapons. There were also concrete pillboxes with disappearing armoured cupolas for artillery and machine guns. A speedy elimination of these strong defences, with the means available to a force designed for mobile warfare, was